A recent discovery is raising concerns over whether America's electricity could just be shut off by the Chinese Communist Party at any moment. The United States is now investigating solar panels from China after rogue communication devices were found in them. Apparently, that could even shut things off on a moment's notice. The issue raises some bigger questions as well, going back more than a decade of suspicious Chinese parts and components in everything from our warplanes to our missile defense system, and nobody's talking about this. I want to go into the history on it. Now, first off, about what just happened recently. Epoch Times said this. It says U.S. energy officials are reassessing the risk posed by Chinese-made devices that play a critical role in renewable energy infrastructure. Communication equipment was found inside some of them. Two people familiar with the matter said. And it's that power inverters, which are predominantly produced in China, are used throughout the world to connect solar panels and wind turbines to electricity grids. They are also found in batteries, heat pumps, and electric vehicle chargers. While inverters are built to allow remote access, that's the important part, meaning you can access it from somewhere else, like a hacker. For updates and maintenance, the utility companies that use them typically install firewalls to prevent direct communication back to China. Firewalls meaning you block communications to them. It's a security thing. And it's that over the past 9 months, undocumented communication devices, including cellular radios, have also been found in some batteries from multiple Chinese suppliers, one of them said. And notes the rogue components provide additional undocumented communication channels that could allow firewalls to be circumvented remotely with potentially catastrophic consequences, the people said. And it notes that using the rogue communication devices to skirt firewalls and switch off inverters remotely or change their settings could destabilize power grids, damage energy infrastructure, and trigger widespread blackouts. What does that mean? If you look at the actual designs of the solar panels, these devices they found installed in them are not on the blueprints, meaning these are not part of the designs, suggesting, of course, that these are, again, what they're calling rogue devices. Someone put them in there for some other reason. Also, security is not what it should be, meaning you can access it if you know where they're at. And the concern is Chinese hackers may just have a backdoor right into it, or the Chinese government, for that matter, the Chinese Communist Party. If they can access these, it means that the CCP, in the event of a war or a conflict or just for the heck of it, could cause blackouts in America, shut off the grid temporarily, or just shut it off for good and then make us buy new parts, maintenance, or launch a war. And that's concerning because, look, why would a foreign country need to communicate with solar panels installed right here in the United States? The finding is raising questions over whether the Chinese regime is doing this intentionally. These are suspicions these could work even as kill switches. The Chinese Communist Party could shut off America's energy grid in the event of a conflict. People warn about, EMP attacks, the ability of the CCP to launch an attack and destroy the electric grid. Well, they don't have to do that. What if the system is already in place? What if it's installed in the things they're selling us in the first place and we were dumb enough to buy it? What if launching an attack like that were just as simple as them pushing a button? Well, that's the concern with this. And interestingly, the recent findings, it's a big deal. But as a journalist, I have personally been on this long enough to remember similar Chinese backdoors, similar vulnerabilities, similar problems were found in many other key systems and electronics in the United States, including our missile defense system. Things that could render it effectively useless. It just wouldn't work. We go to war, we're getting bombed. Missile defense, hit the button, nothing happens. They were in our jets, they were in our warships, they were everywhere. Let me show you some of this history. First off, on some of the devices and so on. Look, back in 2012, there were major findings that this was being found in U.S. military equipment. It was counterfeit and suspicious Chinese electronics. This was major, critical U.S. military equipment. And as a reminder, look, this is the U.S. Senate Committee on Armed Services back in May of 2012, their official statement. It says a Senate Armed Service Committee investigation discovered counterfeit electronic parts from China in the Air Force's largest cargo plane and assembles intended for special operations helicopters and in a Navy surveillance plane among 1,800 cases of bogus parts, a committee report released today shows, at the time 2012. It says the year-long investigation launched by, at the time, Senators Carl Levine, a Democrat of Michigan, the committee's chairman and ranking member, Senator John McCain, at the time, Arizona, found a total number of suspect counterfeit parts involved in those 1,800 cases exceeding 1 million. 1 million Chinese counterfeit parts in our military equipment with possible backdoors and possible problems that can make them non-functional in the event of a conflict. It says the investigation's findings point to China as the dominant source of counterfeit electronic parts, and the committee concluded that the Chinese government, the CCP, quote, has failed to take steps to stop counterfeiting operations that are carried out openly in that country. The Chinese government denied visas to committee staff to travel to mainland China as part of the committee's investigations, meaning the CCP blocked congressional investigations into this. And it says the committee's report includes detailed descriptions of how counterfeits are flooding the supply chain, risking the performance and reliability of critical defense systems. Now it adds as well, the investigation uncovered dozens of examples of suspect counterfeit electronic parts in critical military systems, including on thermal weapon sites delivered to the Army, on mission computers for the Missile Defense Agency's Thermal High Altitude Area Defense, our THAAD system for defending against nuclear attacks, and on a large number of military airplanes, it said. It noted the potential impact of suspect parts on the performance and reliability of defense systems is significant. For example, according to MDA, missile defense systems, right? If suspect counterfeit devices installed on the THAAD missile computers had failed, the THAAD missile itself would likely have failed. We would have been in a nuclear war. Our missile defense system would have tried defending it, and it would have failed, and we would not be here right now if that were to happen. And it's according to the Navy, had counterfeit parts contained in electromagnetic interference filters failed on an SH-60B helicopter, quote, the aircraft's ability to conduct night missions and surface warfare missions involving Hellfire missiles would have been compromised. Now, I should note, there were public reports. There were also classified reports. They never even told us fully the extent of what was discovered. There were multiple investigations like this. And they went on to paint a pretty dire picture. Chips that were coming from China, different parts that were never independently tested. They never were able to independently test these things. Unvetted, going into our military systems, going into our grid, going into our missile defense systems. There were problems of unvetted distributors in China. The Chinese Communist Party itself was blocking investigations on something this serious. There were failures in reporting. We weren't even told the extent of how big this was. And the very big concern was also that these unvetted, untested, unreliable components were in a shocking amount of military equipment. Our military, our missile defense systems, our mission control systems, even in really key equipment, including helicopters, warplanes, warships, many, many others. It was found in our critical infrastructure, which is what they're finding again right now with these solar panels. It was a huge finding, and it's been ongoing. Now, look, additional reports, including one from the Government Accountability Office at that time, right? Back in 2010 to 2012, 2013, a lot of analysis at that time. We were told a lot then. We haven't really been told a lot since. But they also found similar problems of counterfeit internet routers getting sold to the Navy. Counterfeit microprocessors getting sold to the U.S. Air Force, even getting installed on the F-15 flight control computers, our fighter jets. Bad parts ended up in navigation systems of the Air Force and the Navy. And these were found to, quote, have a, quote, high failure rate that could even interfere with the unmanned war systems, meaning if we were launching drones like the Predator drone, It just might do its own thing, might not even come back. Now, look, those investigations led to additional concerns that aside from potential risk of our military equipment just, failing in the event of a war, not working, maybe the Chinese counterfeits ended up just, happened to shut off, for example. Maybe our missile systems would not work if we found ourselves under attack. There was also a concern the Chinese Communist Party was doing this intentionally. At the very least, they were blocking investigations. At the very least, they were putting systems in place to fool us, to keep this hidden, to not report any of it. And that maybe also these components had a kill switch built in. And if that sounds familiar, because that's what's happening right now with the electric grid, with these solar panels, did they have a kill switch built in? This is not a new concern. Maybe some of these could allow for remote access, Chinese hackers getting access to our systems. And that raised other concerns. Aside from shutting it down, aside from, stealing data, what if they could seize control over it? What if we launched a drone and suddenly the drone turned against us? This was raising major concerns. Now, at that time, I did my own investigations. I was still a reporter at that time. It turned out this was not just a threat to military equipment. It was also in electronics being sold to us, being installed in even key government systems. This was everywhere. It was found that many Chinese electronics, almost across the board, even random devices, had backdoors, pre-installed viruses, and other things in them that would allow the CCP to spy on people. Some even just had directly spy devices installed for nothing else. I wrote this piece back in 2013. One example of this. I said this. There was a long list of devices riddled with backdoors, infected with malware, or fitted with spying devices before even leaving Chinese factories. They came here like that. These range from kettles to laptops, from USB keys to cameras, and from consumer software right up to military components. I noted one example of this, June 2011, Hong Kong newspaper Apple Daily, this is before the CCP ended Hong Kong's democracy. Apple Daily uncovered recording devices installed in all dual-plate Chinese Hong Kong vehicles. It turned out they were labeled as inspection and quarantine cards. This was pre-COVID, by the way, folks. And were installed free of charge by China's Shenzhen Inspection and Quarantine Bureau. In June 2010, an auto-run virus in China, meaning it just did its own thing, made memory cards in Olympus-style tough cameras. This was infecting computers in Japan. People had, buying Olympus cameras, the memory cards for them coming from China. You plug it in, it infected your computer. The virus was uncovered just a week after. An identical virus, the same thing, was found in memory cards of Samsung smartphones. Before that, there were viruses in devices including China-made TomTom GPS systems, Insignia digital picture frames. If you have those little digital picture frames of your family, those things had Chinese malware installed in them. Those are being sold at Best Buy, Target, and Sam's Club. These were not things randomly on the internet. These were in your official storefronts, infected, pre-infected with Chinese malware. Now, I noted many other incidents. There was a very bizarre finding in Russia, actually. In Russia, they found this. Russia imported irons and kettles, electric kettles, from China. Customs officers noted that the weights didn't match up. What do? They investigated, they opened them up, and what they found was this. The household kettles and irons, ironing your clothes, these had Wi-Fi chips and microprocessors installed in them. Again, rogue devices, just like what was just found in these solar panels. Rogue devices. And what happened? If you were to take one of those kettles or one of those irons and plug it in, then the Chinese chips would automatically search for unsecured Wi-Fi networks, like there's no password on it. It would connect to the Wi-Fi, and then it would have a call home function back to China, and it would then grant access to whoever was running this thing back in China. It was allowing the CCP to infect all the Russian Wi-Fi systems. Now, I noted a congressional hearing as well back in 2011. This has been going on for a long time. Greg Schaefer, the acting deputy undersecretary at DHS's National Protections and Programs Directorate at the time, He was called in to testify at the House Oversight Committee on National Security, Homeland Defense, and Foreign Operations. This was a hearing. And as I wrote at the time, it was bizarre. He was asked whether there are risks of having electronics built overseas. And it was interesting. He tried avoiding the question. He tried several times. I watched this live, right? He tried avoiding it. But when he was pressed over and over again to give a clear answer, Schaefer gave a short but what I would call very grim response. He said this. He said he knew of cases where foreign-made devices had been pre-installed with infected software or hardware, and he noted, quote, "We believe there is significant risk in the area of supply chain." And then he said this, "This is one of the most complicated and difficult challenges that we have." And actually, look, I did several investigations like this. I covered this for quite a while. Similar backdoors, Chinese backdoors, breaches, malware, viruses, they were found in Chinese laptops, Lenovo ones, for example, one of the reasons they got banned in government offices. They were found in Chinese smartphones. They were found in other devices, including major Chinese brands. These were not random knockoff brands. These were the big ones. These were all the big name products from China, even major U.S. companies and other companies that just happen to manufacture in China. They were being infected. There were backdoors being installed in them, including at the firmware level. What's the firmware? Basically, that's the software that's installed on chips, not on the Surface device. And so even if you were to delete everything on your phone, even if you were to wipe your computer, it would be installed on the chips and it would still be there. You could not get rid of it. It was also found that these led to a lot of other things. In fact, it was also these findings and others that led the U.S. to have some restrictions on U.S. electronics from Chinese telecom companies ZTE and Huawei, one of the big controversies at the time as well. But in terms of the broader implications for the U.S. military, it turned out these Chinese counterfeits and rogue components, whatever you want to call them, they're hard to recognize. It's very hard to identify where they've been installed. It's hard to root them out from the supply chain, especially when the CCP blocks investigations. And even not just for the military, almost across the board with any equipment, including in major critical infrastructure, a concern raised at the time and now being discovered. How long did it take them to finally realize that, hey, all these solar panels we're buying from China, subsidized by American taxpayers, were pre-installed with devices that could allow the CCP remote access where they could shut off our electric grid, potentially? Now, look, these findings started a whole big movement. It started under the Obama administration. They tried to secure America's supply chains against what were called supply chain threats. Those discussions have basically continued ever since. They never fixed it. The same problem existed under the Trump administration. It existed under the Biden administration. They addressed it here and there, and leading up to now, it's still going on. Where in the latest finding, it's been discovered yet again that Chinese rogue components have found their way into our critical infrastructure, solar panels in this case, that could put our entire electric grid at risk. And actually, look, the finding with the solar panels, it's just one of many similar findings coming about. For example, even now, Congress recently issued a warning for Americans to stop using TP-Link routers, which are made in China. They're also the highest selling routers in the United States. Most people have them. And to stop using any China-made routers for that point, meaning the CCP could access your internet connection. They could watch everything you're doing, your banking data, your personal data, anything you put on your computer. They get it. Now, this is over the same concerns that they have vulnerabilities that could let the CCP hackers gain access to them. Does your business have TP-Link routers? Does your local government office have TP-Link routers? Well, that's a concern. Do you do your taxes over the internet? Well, that's also concerning. Congress right now is even weighing in whether Chinese routers should be banned altogether in the United States. This is happening as we speak, and that's a big deal. TP-Link routers and China-made routers in general, well, that's most of the routers in the United States. And Chinese tech companies overall, well, they seem to also delve into these problems quite often. Just as another example, one of many, Tencent, you might have heard of it. It owns a huge part of the video game market. They also run an anti-cheat gaming software that has almost full access to your computer if you dare install one of their video games, which happens to be most of the major name ones, by the way, was recently blacklisted by the Pentagon over the company's ties to the Chinese military. It's deemed now a Chinese military company running your kids' video games. If you install them on your smartphone or your computer and it pre-installs this, backdoor access thing as anti-cheat software, well, everything you say and do is now at risk. And on this point, it's important to note this type of access is required by the Chinese Communist Party by law. This is not by accident. This is not some random thing. Chinese Communist Party law has a requirement that all data needs to be viewable and accessible by the Chinese Communist Party. And this raises concerns over what we're seeing right now, right? What are they using this for? What are they really doing with it? Well, we know they have Chinese hackers basically stealing everything they can from us. Does it go broader than this? Well, we don't really know. There's concerns that they could even get backdoor access, even control or shut down whatever systems they're connected to, and we let them do it. We let them do it. So for me, look, I'd view the recent discovery over these rogue Chinese devices and America's solar panels in light of this entire picture. This is not some isolated incident. This is a trend that exists almost across the board with Chinese electronics. Almost every time they're analyzed, they find issues like this. And why is that? Maybe because it's intentional. All of these represent a serious threat to the United States. Now, folks, in other news, there was another attempt underway to impeach President Donald Trump. You might have seen this. And it's now been withdrawn because, well, it didn't have the support it needed, not even from Democrats. CBS News said this: Democratic Representative Shri Thandar of Michigan backed down from his attempt to force a vote on impeaching President Trump after it lacked support from his own party. Democrats didn't want it. It says the House was expected to vote on Wednesday evening to table Thandar's motion to impeach Mr. Trump for alleged high crimes and misdemeanors. If he sounds like a broken record, it's because you've been hearing that for a long time. It says, which would have effectively killed it. They would have voted against it. It was dead in the water. You know, it said Thandar filed his 7 articles of impeachment against Mr. Trump in April, but moved Tuesday to bring it up as privileged, requiring the House to act on the motion within 2 legislative days. But Thandar's changed course by Wednesday afternoon after having conversations with his colleagues who talked him out of it, basically, is what happened. Now, note this. Thandar's 29-page resolution accused Mr. Donald Trump of obstructing justice, overriding Congress's power to appropriate funds, abusing the power of the presidency, violating First Amendment rights, and unlawfully creating the Department of Government Efficiency. Those were accusations. Even the Democrats didn't think it was strong enough to hold up. So it's not happening. For now, the attempt to impeach Donald Trump is yet again off the table. More to come probably, but for now, we're not going to see it. And it's important to note also, this was shot down. It was not shot down by Republicans. They probably would have voted against it had it actually gone to vote. It didn't get off the ground because even Democrats were not behind this. You know, Democrats didn't support this. They didn't think it had much of a chance. It wasn't strong enough. So on that point, impeachment is off the table. They're not going to try to impeach Trump as of now. Now, on to another topic, though. The U.S. military took over a strip of land, basically stretching the full length of the southern border from the California Ocean all the way to Texas, to the border of Texas. And what this did was this. It created an additional criminal charge for anybody who dares set foot on that land, meaning if you illegally enter the United States in 3 states, you are now committing a pretty serious crime. And the first group of illegal immigrants is now facing criminal charges on this. I'll be talking more about it after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges with a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold. You can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The U.S. military recently took over a big strip of land, in fact, very big. It stretches the full border of California, Arizona, and New Mexico, the southern border. That was almost 110,000 acres along the border, effectively covering the entire southern border with the exception of Texas, which again has its own border security operations. And in addition to this, this allows the military to operate more freely to carry out border security, to deputize individuals to work on, through military courts, and also create an additional criminal charge for anybody who even sets foot on that land. Meaning, if you illegally cross the border now in those 3 states, you're trespassing on military property, and that's a crime. So in other words, if someone tries to illegally enter the U.S., they now commit the crime of trespassing on U.S. military property. And the very first group of illegal immigrants, they're now facing criminal charges for this. Common Defense said this. It said, in a controversial move with sweeping implications, the Department of Justice has charged several hundred immigrants, read illegal immigrants, with unauthorized entry into newly established military zones along the U.S.-Mexico border in New Mexico and western Texas. It says the charges stem from a new enforcement strategy rolled out in late April by the Trump administration, which transferred jurisdiction over specific borderlands to the military and authorized the temporary detention of immigrants, they mean illegal aliens, by U.S. troops. Troops, not the Border Patrol, are now detaining these individuals. And notes this as well. It says the designated National Defense Areas, NDAS, now under the control of the U.S. Army commands based at Fort Bliss in Texas and Fort Huachuna in Arizona, represent a dramatic escalation in the federal government's approach to border enforcement. It says migrants, they believe, they're saying again, illegal immigrants, crossing into these areas illegally now face national security-related charges that can carry up to 18 months in prison, over a year in jail, in addition to 6 months penalty for unlawful entry. It notes as well, according to an official from the Federal Public Defender's Office in Las Cruces, approximately 400 cases have already been filed in criminal court, with defense attorneys now seeking the dismissal of charges that they argue are both unprecedented and overreaching. And that's a big deal. Trump kind of pulled a fast one, because look, this means it's no longer just catch and release if someone, illegally crosses into the United States. How did this used to work? And I've been to the border, I've watched this happen. What happens typically? What do they tell you? It used to be the case that if someone were trying to illegally enter the country, what would happen? Well, they'd cross over. It's very easy to do. If they got caught by Border Patrol, they take them, drive them back across the border, they drop them off, and then what happens? Well, those people they drop off, they just immediately do a little U-turn and try to cross again immediately after. It's just catch and release, and they just keep doing it until they get through. That's been the situation for a long time. They illegally cross, you catch them, you bring them back to Mexico, you let them go, and they do it again. But what has happened now with this military designation, that this land they're now crossing over as military property, it's now a crime. It means that if you get caught now, you go to prison. And this is not technically illegally entering the United States, but instead the crime of illegally trespassing on U.S. military property. And as we just saw as well, the law on this is now being enforced. This is not just a threat, they are doing it. Illegal immigrants again, are now coming across. They're getting thrown in prison. And they're being charged with additional crimes that were not there before. Folks, that said, if you have a question, comment, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. A lot going on as well. One quick note, because people might have seen this. Former FBI Director James Comey is in kind of hot water right now. He posted a photograph at the beach saying he came across some seashells, and the seashells were aligned to say 8647. Seems innocent enough. What does that mean? Well, he claims he does not know what it means. He claims it was just a friendly photo. But a lot of people made it out, so they said, well, what is 47? Well, Trump is the 45th and 47th president of the United States. So Trump, a reference to Trump, 47. And what does 86 mean? Well, 86 suggests to remove or get rid of. And a lot of people have taken that as a death threat, including the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who has now declared that they are investigating James Comey for an alleged threat. Donald Trump also has commented on this, saying it was a death threat. He's suggesting that James Comey was threatening to kill the president or making a call to kill the president. James Comey says he does not see it that way. He apologized. He said it was innocent. He says he didn't know what it meant. We'll see if he actually knew what it meant because they're now investigating him. I will add one point on this. It's very hard to prove intent in court. And also, if the Director of National Intelligence wants to really investigate somebody, it's usually smarter to not announce it on like Twitter. You know what I mean? Because what's going to happen is, well, they stop their communications if there is a plot. So there is a bit of showmanship here, I'd say on both sides, to be honest. But we will see what comes out from this. At the very least, they are now investigating James Comey. They've announced it. Again, if you want to have a real serious investigation, you typically do not announce it to the entire public on X. So again, we'll see what comes out from this. But it's a pretty big deal, though. All right, folks, that said, another question here. Seymour Butts, you're saying, Seymour, there is no doubt that when a Chinese manufacturer builds something for the U.S., they put hardware and software into it that allow them some level of control over it. But what about other things like pharmaceuticals and food? Do they control those too? Well, without a doubt, there have been findings that a lot of the food products sold here are not healthy. Do they do that intentionally? Is just cheap Chinese manufacturing? I don't know. I can say there's an organization, I don't know if they still do it, but I've gone to their press event. In the past, I've gone to their press events in New York City. There's an organization that every year they used to analyze children's toys for harmful chemicals. And they would hold big events, usually in New York City. Again, I've personally gone to these events. And they say, the toys your children are playing with are laden with poison. Your children are playing with poison. Dangerous levels of lead, dangerous levels of heavy metals that could significantly harm your child. And your kids are playing with these things. They're putting them in their mouths. They're being poisoned in some ways. And where are these coming from? They're coming from China. And is that intentional? I don't know. But if you wanted to harm your adversary, that would be a great way to do it. Poison their children. Give them lead poisoning. That was, in fact, the case. Now, you might have seen the recent headlines that all these toy manufacturers are wondering what to do because a lot of their production comes from China and they have to resupply now for the upcoming holiday seasons. They tend to buy things pretty early, right? Well, if you were to ask me, I'd say good. Maybe fewer kids will get lead poisoning this year because they're not buying cheap Chinese products. And it's not even just lead. I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot of harmful chemicals these days. If you even understand furniture and what they call off-gassing of furniture, especially made in China furniture, you ever buy new furniture and it just smells wrong? They call that off-gassing. I would encourage all of you to go and read the health impacts of off-gassing of furniture. Now, that doesn't mean you buy some Amish-made, table or chair, some, handmade thing, you're not going to have a problem with that. If you're getting a product that is made in a responsible way, made with good materials, you're not going to have off-gassing that's harmful to you. But Chinese products, made in Chinese products, are known to have harmful off-gassing. They release into your home harmful substances, and you inhale those and they hurt you. We are being harmed in so many ways, I'd say. I don't know about pharmaceuticals coming from China. I would point to the many lawsuits over the side effects of many drugs that are manufactured. They don't often tell you about this, but it is a big problem here in the U.S. And also, I would say that there are a lot of harmful foods, but we don't need China to do that for us. We do it to ourselves as well. There are a lot of harmful chemicals in a lot of products. Is some of that intentional? I personally believe some of it is coming from China. But in my opinion, there's not nearly enough investigation into this. This is a huge problem. And if you think about what Americans have been dealing with, we're either highly resilient or highly poisoned. Maybe we're like the Dread Pirate Roberts, where we've been like slowly microdose poisoning ourselves for our entire lives, and we're just immune to everything at this point. Or we're so drastically poisoned that we're being like brought down and we don't even realize it. I'd wonder how strong our immune systems are if we can withstand all this stuff. How many vaccines? We have like 70 vaccines. We take every medication known to man. We take medication to offset the side effects of our medication. That's how medicated we are. We consume every harmful chemical known to man. Our food products are banned in like 50 countries, and we eat it on a daily basis, and we're still standing. So we got something going on, folks. I do wonder what's going to happen if we cut off that supply. Even our furniture and household products poison us in various ways. Joking aside, I would actually say that it is probably really affecting our health. And I really wonder what the impact will be on us once we remove these poisons. Because I do believe we are being poisoned to a very broad extent by a very large number of harmful chemicals and products. And yes, a lot of that comes from China. It's not entirely from there, but a lot of it does. Michael Kolovovsky is saying, and just like that, Made in America became a national security issue. Stand by for a wartime production infrastructure turbocharge. I love the sound of that. On that point, actually, that is also happening. Everything aside, even aside from the embedded, there are a lot of terms that were used for these different vulnerabilities in our electronics. For several years, I covered cybersecurity. I covered national security for a long time. Again, I've been a journalist for almost 20 years. I've been a journalist since 2006. So I've been on this for a long time. They used to call them embedded threats. They used to call them supply chain threats. They used to call them embedded vulnerabilities. There's all kinds of security names they give them. But this has been going on for a really long time. Even aside from that, though, there was a military study done during the Biden administration. My sense of time's not good. It was I think 2 years ago. There was a study done, and this caused a big stir for the United States, because what did it find? This military study found, or alleged, that were the United States to have gone to war right now as we speak against the Chinese Communist Party, we would fail. And what was the basis of that? Well, part of it had to do with the fact we'd probably be fighting several countries. As many of you may know, the U.S. military is designed to fight two major conflicts simultaneously. An Eastern Front and a Western Front. Because of the geography of the United States, we're like a geo bastion. America is a very hard to attack country. Southern border, very narrow pass, easily defensible. Northern border, we have a nice big buffer of the snow people. I'm joking. It's hard to invade through Canada because of, it's Arctic regions, right? And they have to go through the Canadians first. But that's also why Arctic security is such a big. I'm joking. I like to poke fun at the Canadian. I know we have a lot of viewers in Canada. I have a lot of friends who are Canadian. But it's very hard to attack us through the northern border, and America tends to secure the northern border. The two main areas are the Western Front and the Eastern Front, right? And that's why we have effectively two militaries. We have one very big military and 50 small ones, which are the National Guard. But we mainly focus on these two fronts. In addition to different operational commands, America is a very big military, folks. We're in Asia, we're in the Middle East, we have operational commands embedded in a lot of countries, in the Philippines, in Germany, we're all over the place. But America is set up to fight effectively, if it really came down to it, a war on the Eastern Front and a war on the Western Front. We did this during World War II. Army, for the most part, the U.S. Army was fighting against the Nazis and the Italians in the North Africa and so on. It wasn't just the Nazis. The U.S. Army was mainly fighting them, and the U.S. Marines were mainly fighting the Japanese. So the U.S. Marine Corps, World War II, a lot of people focus on the Eastern Front, or what I would call the Eastern Front. They were fighting in Europe and so on. A lot of the war movies are about that. The Marines fighting in the Pacific, those dudes were fighting a crazy battle. A lot of my family was Marine and Navy. So, I know a lot of that history because my family takes a lot of pride in military stories. If you were ever to hang out with me and my family, a lot of the guys, it's drinking beer and telling cool stories. It's kind of what life is on that side of my family. And so we do have a culture in my family where we tend to glorify the war stories of our uncles and grandparents and cousins and so on like that. And a lot of my family works in security. One of my great uncles, we love to tell his story. He was a sergeant in the Pacific Theater. He won a gold star because he brought his men. They were under fire from 2 Japanese machine gun nests. And he brought his men one by one across a bridge under dual fire from machine gun nests, and then took out both of the machine gun bunkers without losing a single man. And he won a bronze star for that. And so we take pride in this. And my grandpa, being competitive, told him he was going to excel him both in terms of rank and in terms of merit, and actually did. So we like these stories. But anyways, war stories aside, that was an example of the way that America is designed to fight. We have the ability to fight 2 major wars simultaneously. What's the problem these days? The Chinese Communist Party's military strategy, as I've repeated over and over again, is they want to drag the United States into at least 4 wars. They want to have us fighting at least 4 wars if they were to start a war with us. So if China were to attack us, if they were to invade Taiwan, they would want to have us busy on multiple other fronts because they understand we are designed to fight and win 2 wars. So they need more than 2 wars. They want to have us fighting Russia. They said this. In terms of what they actually said, this is according to Sin Cao-rong, who was one of the main advisors to Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. He said that they wanted America to fight a terrorism war. They wanted us to fight a war in Latin America. They actually wanted us to go to war with Brazil, interestingly. That was off the table under Bolsonaro. Lula's now back in. They wanted us to fight with them. And if Lula and Maduro in Venezuela joined forces, we may just see that. That was part of the plan. The CCP declared this. So Latin America, war. They wanted us at war with Russia. They wanted us fighting a terrorism war, think Iran and everything else. And then they wanted to go to war with us too. And once those cards were in place, that's when they'd start their war. This was publicly disclosed. It was not a secret. That's according to Sin Cao-rong, one of the main advisors to Xi Jinping. And it's based on the analysis of how America is designed to fight, right? So what was the big report that came out? It was a year or 2. I think it was 2 years ago now, because that we're getting pretty close to the, well, bit over 100 days of Trump, right? The analysis was, if America were to go to war right now, we'd probably lose. And the analysis was that we'd be fighting probably 4 wars, as Chin Ken-rong declared was the intent. And if we don't get other allies on board with us, we will not be able to do it. And the analysis was, we need to get strong allies, you know, Western Europe, strong, fighting with us, get Canada fighting with us, get Japan fighting with us, get all of our allies together, and make sure that we're not going at it alone. We need to have allies. We need to have strong allies. But the other big thing they found was that on the supply chain level, we would be hamstrung were we to go to war with China. And that was the big thing about national security threats as it relates to manufacturing. They were saying that because we've gotten rid of almost all of our domestic manufacturing, we would not have the capabilities of wartime manufacturing. What happened during World War II? What were those posters of women flexing their muscles? You know, the women were working in the factories. That's why. And what were they making in those factories? Well, Ford was not making cars, they were making tanks. You know, you had our vehicle manufacturers, the ones making, you know, your cars that are just kind of normally out there, making airplanes and fighter planes and everything else. You need to have domestic manufacturing to do that. You need to have domestic manufacturing for medications. You need to have the ability to make sure that if our guys get injured, you have enough systems to treat them. And the problem is we get most of that from China. And so if we've offshored all of our manufacturing, what happens? Well, we're not going to have the ability to fight a war. And yeah, we could maybe buy it from other countries like, I don't know, Europe or maybe Mexico or maybe Canada. But what happens if those supply chains start getting targeted? Remember, that was a big problem the UK had when they were trying to go it alone against the Nazis before America, you know, stepped into that. We were sending supply ships. The Nazi U-boats were you know, wrecking us. They were destroying us. If your stability depends on a very vulnerable supply chain going across very big bodies of water, you are not in a strong position. And so the analysis that came out a couple years ago was that if America is going to win a future war, we need to have domestic manufacturing. That was during the Biden administration. This is not necessarily a partisan issue. And so I would say the bringing home of manufacturing is not just about business, it's not just about Liberation Day or whatever Trump wants to call it. This is a national security issue. If America wants to survive as a country against the publicly declared very real threats against us, we need to have domestic manufacturing. And that's the reason for it. One of the reasons for it. Let's see, another question here. Candace Harden, you're saying China undercuts electronics in the market so they can install these devices in our lives that gather data, much like free apps, etc. Yeah, they do that. On that point, I saw some of you asking, you know, wouldn't the CCP have to spend a ridiculous amount of money to install like spying devices on everything? Yes and no. Let me explain. So, remember in China, if you have a business, I believe with like a pretty small threshold, I think like over 50 people, you need to have a Communist Party liaison office in your business. There's no such thing as an independent business in China because of the way the CCP law works. If your business grows to a certain extent, even your employees need to join the Communist Party. There's no independent business in China. They're all under the CCP. I mean, unless you're like selling hot dogs on the street, you know what I mean? Unless you're like some little vendor, if you grow to even a moderately low small business size, but you're like above the street vendor, yeah, you got to be part of the Communist Party. They have to at least install things that allow the CCP to control your business. And what does that mean? Well, it means it's interconnected with the Chinese military, Chinese intelligence apparatus, and of course, oversight from Chinese law. Chinese law does dictate that all data needs to be secure, and accessible by the Chinese Communist Party, open and accessible to the Chinese Communist Party. They have data retention laws. They have laws even for American companies going to China where they have to hand over their source codes, meaning the CCP then can effectively gain access to the entire systems of every tech company going to China, which we should not be allowing in the first place, by the way, because then they can just take it and copy, which they do. They do that. But also, what the CCP can then do is the Chinese military can develop malware, computer viruses, which they can dictate. If you want to sell this product, you need to install this at the firmware level of your product. Imagine you're a Chinese, and I'll give you real examples. A lot of Chinese smartphones at the firmware level have pre-installed malware. What does that mean? It means that, again, when you're using a device like a computer or your phone and you're interacting with it, what you're interacting with is the software or the operating system. That's surface level. You can alter it. If you're really good, you can break it down, you can code it, you can change it a little bit usually. But within your electronic, there's also different devices, right? There's the thing that communicates with your operating system on the screen. There's the chip inside that contains the memory. There's the chip that controls the touch things and so on. If any of you have ever tried to install the new device on your computer, even something as simple as a mouse or a good headset, if you have like a headset, you'll notice if you plug it in sometimes, it has to install something. What is it installing? It's installing firmware. What is firmware? It's the software that exists within the device itself, often at the chip level. And it's also the thing that allows the device to communicate and work with your Surface device, your computer or your smartphone. And so what happens is this. When people think computer viruses, they're often thinking, you open up an infected email and you click the the free money.exe thing or something like that, right? And then it infects your computer. It's not like that usually. Real advanced threats are embedded threats. You take a USB drive and you plug it into your computer, and because a USB drive will also have firmware, it installs something on your computer. Within the firmware, they'll install the vulnerabilities. And so your computer is infected as soon as it's connected. But the ones coming from Chinese factories, they don't have to do that. They can come from the factory with that. And that's what a lot of security analysts were finding. Again, I used to cover this stuff. I for several years, from like 2010 to like 2014 or 15, a lot of my beat was around national security and cybersecurity. So I covered this stuff all the time. There were tons of examples like this. And that gets concerning because, well, it means the Chinese Communist Party is basically dictating the spying on basically everything. Now, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to do that. It can just be the Chinese security system saying that if you're going to run this factory and you want to have a license, if the head of your company doesn't want to get investigated for corruption, what a corrupt official for not installing malware on foreign devices. If you don't want to get investigated for corruption, you got to pre-install these things on all your devices, right? You're not working with the CCP. And there have been a lot of examples like this. ByteDance, the former head of ByteDance, which runs TikTok, wrote a public apology letter because he said he failed to, not his exact words, but failed to properly work with the Chinese Communist Party on its objectives. Most of the video game companies in China, they used to get blocked by the CCP. They came together, a very large conglomerate of them, wrote a public letter saying that they will, from that day forward, work with the Chinese Communist Party. And what does that entail? It means if the CCP tells you to pre-install malware on your device, you have to do it. You don't have a choice. That is Chinese law, and it's the way it works. Now, that doesn't mean we should be okay with that. It doesn't mean we should just let it happen. But it does raise concerns that you can't trust anything. No electronic coming from China should be trusted, not because of, the companies or the head of the company, some evil, rubbing his hands together wants to infect your device. It's because the CCP does it. It's Chinese law under the Chinese Communist Party. Now, on that point, if you're just dealing with firmware and stuff, it doesn't cost them a lot of money. They could just dictate that you have to install this China spy firmware, and they'll just call it a national security issue. They won't call it for spying. They'll say this is for security reasons. When it comes to what they just found on the electric grid, the pre-installed devices on the solar panels that allow for remote access and remote control, where they could potentially shut down our electric grid, basically is what that means, which is really serious, by the way. They could just disable our electricity in the event of a war. And that's crazy because it means they don't have to launch some EMP attack to do it. That is a huge issue. The breadth and significance of that cannot be understated. That would cost them a bit more money, but you would have to view that from the CCP's perspective as a form of warfare. For them, in their military doctrine, they have what's called the assassin's mace. It also translates as the Trump card. No relation to Donald Trump, by the way. The Trump card, meaning you're playing cards and you have the card, you have the ace up your sleeve type thing. The Assassin's Mace program basically is the military doctrine the CCP has against the U.S. military, which basically revolves around disabling the enabling system of our military. Rather than trying to fight the F-22 in dogfights, rather than trying to go toe-to-toe against the U.S. Marines, they would just, destroy our satellites. They would use a hemp attack, HEMP, which is like high altitude nuclear detonation for an EMP strike to wipe out our electric grid. They publicly talk about this. So they would destroy our command and control systems, in other words. And if you destroy that, GPS, everything else, it means the missile guidance systems go down, command and control goes down, ship navigation goes down, and while the military does train for what they call denied operations or whatever like that, meaning that their communications are down, how do you still function? It would significantly impact our capabilities. And so the Chinese military doctrine for the United States, designed just for us, the Assassin's Mace program, they also call it the Little White Rabbit, by the way, revolves around that. And so them having that ability embedded within our electric grid, which is basically what was just discovered, the significance of that cannot be understated. This needs to be viewed as a military attack on the United States, as a discovered military attack on the United States. But one last point on that. And so for the CCP, they'd probably say the cost is worth the investment if it means being able to defeat the United States in a future war. And on that point, too, that was a concern even raised with the CCP building energy infrastructure in other countries. For example, in the United Kingdom, in the UK, the CCP was trying to get contracts to build nuclear energy facilities. They do that in a lot of countries. Part of the concern that was raised in the United Kingdom was if they allowed the CCP to build their electric grid infrastructure, that in the event of a conflict, they could just shut it off. And so I believe they've now been galvanized in that concern by what was just discovered in the United States. One last point on that, though, when it comes to all this surveillance, because you could think, okay, they're collecting information on everybody. How are they going to ever analyze that? The overabundance of data has become a problem not just for other countries, but it's even cited in the United States. Law enforcement, intelligence agencies, there's an overabundance of information. They just can't sift through everything. It's like going to a library and you don't know what book you want to check out, and you're like, well, I guess I got to read everything in the entire library. It's going to be overwhelming. You're never going to do it. Same thing with data collection. There's so much data, they can never possibly sift through it all. But what changed the game is artificial intelligence, AI. AI has changed the game. AI works as a big Sherlock Holmes that can instantaneously sift through, sort, and even flag data that may be valuable for the CCP in this case, for spying. And that's kind of what they're doing now. AI has supercharged foreign espionage. And so the CCP, that's what they're doing with all this data now. And also on that point, we talk about the social credit system. They include Americans on that. They include Americans on the social credit system. And so when they were stealing Office of Personnel Management data on U.S. government employees, when they were stealing health data on Americans, they're plugging it into the social credit system. So it's not just your homeless Chinese person who dared support democracy, who's on the naughty list of their system. You might just be on it too. And if they ever have a plug and play where they're able to implement that here, you're on the system. They have done that already. That's already in place. Let's see. California gal, you're saying, reminds me of how people in Germany put up concentration camps, made equipment in such a way that it would fail. Yeah, that's been an issue for a long time too. There was suspicion, for example, that people would, for example, if you were in a factory making firearms, maybe you'd finagle it in such a way where the individual firing it would backfire and like the gas tube would go through the guy's eye socket or something. There were suspicions even in Vietnam that some of the hippies were getting jobs, or communists were getting jobs in the factories, and they were intentionally sabotaging some of the guns to kill our troops. There is issues like that. You can do that, and that I'd say that's conventional sabotage, sabotaging the factories to render something unuseful or dangerous. Unconventional warfare, but common warfare. Candace Harden, you also said that China undercuts electronics in the market. Yeah, that actually has to do also with the way we've allowed them to create monopolies. Because they can subsidize things, they can use state subsidies to undercut everybody, put all their competitors out of business, and then establish a monopoly where they even buy up their competitors. Sometimes even using American investments to do it. They have a word for that, strangle you with your own systems. Not just systems, but I think Americans would say building the rope to hang yourself or something like that, right? It's very similar. We empower them to do it and we let them do it. It's insane. It's absolutely crazy. Capacitive guitar resistance, you're saying, why would we even get our military equipment parts from our greatest enemy? Insane. I would 100% agree. I believe we collectively lost our minds with the way we offshored so much manufacturing. On the point of the chips, this is a bipartisan issue. This is not really a Republican-Democrat thing. Look, back in the past, go back to like the Bush era Republicans, they were more the absolute free market ones. Democrats were more the ones about, local jobs. They've changed quite a bit since then. But I think the Republicans are very different now, or at least to an extent. But there was always a concern, national security-wise, about China's role in our manufacturing. During the Obama administration, they were trying to find ways to, quote-unquote, secure our supply chain. And that actually started a lot of the moves, even when it came to rare earth minerals, to make sure that our military, in the event of a war, because remember, Obama did the Asia pivot. Obama was the one who moved a lot of our military to the Asia-Pacific theater to try to push back against a potential war with China. He did that. And it was because of a lot of these things happening. When China began the CCP, we should separate the CCP from the Chinese people. When the Chinese Communist Party began its moves to take over the East China Sea and the South China Sea, what was one of the first things it did? It declared ownership over the Japanese Senkaku Islands. The CCP claimed historical ownership over the Senkaku Islands. It's the Diaoyu Islands. Then what happened? When Japan defended the island, which is part of Japanese territory, the Chinese Communist Party cut off the supplies of rare earth minerals to Japan. When they did that, that sent a warning bell going around the whole world saying the CCP will cut off a supply chain in the event of a conflict or even a diplomatic conflict. And if they choose to do that, they're going to disable your entire high-tech industry and probably part of your military. For the U.S. military, we depend on that, which was a terrible idea. And so that was a warning shot for the U.S. military that we need to secure our supply chains. And Obama did take efforts to do that. They did begin efforts to make sure that maybe not for our entire industry, but at least for basic war-fighting capabilities that we would have enough in the event of a war. When they began looking to secure the supply chain on the entire breadth of what they were finding, all these embedded threats, it became very difficult. They never managed to fix it. Even when Trump was in office right after Obama, they were not able to fix it. The concerns were actually raised again during that time, and they were raised again under Biden, especially because of COVID-19 and the economic shutdowns, because a lot of this, we were forced to address some supply chain threats with the economic shutdowns. When the CCP was restricting all the ports and all shipments, that forced us to begin looking at this. And one of the problems they had was that it wasn't even just chips or, hardware, as you would call it. It was even the tiny components on the chips themselves that were the problems. I don't know if any of you have ever got curious and opened up your computer or something like that, and you'll notice there's your motherboard, right? That big green plate thing. And on it, there are all these different welded components. Those components, almost all of them come from China. And what they found during the Obama administration is that there was no way to manufacture those in a cost-effective way. People just would not do it. You would have to pay significantly more to have those things manufactured. So they didn't have other options. At some point, those need to be investigated, because when they were finding non-functional products from China and in our missile defense system, the THAAD missile system, and in our command and control systems, a lot of the problems they were finding was those tiny components that they had a high failure rate, or they were just not reliable, or maybe they were intentionally like that, or maybe they had an embedded firmware that we weren't even aware of that could infect the entire device. It was never addressed. And so I do hope they address it. I do hope they find other ways out of it, because this is a big problem. And it's been recognized as a very big problem for a long time now. Again, it's over a decade now. This has been recognized as a serious national security threat for more than a decade, and still not addressed. Denise B., you're saying, Josh, with the cheek/tongue swabs currently being taken of foreigners arriving at China airports with no explanation as to why, could the CCP use this to gain personal genetic information or to spread a new virus? Both concerns are there. On one side, the CCP is dealing with unknown mysterious viruses. That is happening. Briefly on this, quick note from Bloomberg. I'll read it to you. U.S. Embassy in Beijing confirms reports that some American citizens flying into Chinese airports have been subjected to, quote, invasive medical testing before entering China's customs. U.S. officials said they're looking into the matter. Part of that, if you want to be benign, you can say it's because they're dealing with all these unknown viruses and they probably want to check for things. On the more likely level and the more nefarious level, the CCP does this for biometric gathering. And I would give a direct example of that, which is what they do to people in Xinjiang, the Muslim Uyghurs. One of the human rights abuses that has been raised by the Muslim Uyghurs living in Xinjiang is the CCP has, it's like living in 1984. They have biometric scanning devices checkpoints, everything set up. It's like living in a horror movie of like some post-apocalyptic, dystopia. And one of the things the CCP will do to just every random civilian is they'll give them random tongue swabs. And again, that ties into biometric surveillance. It ties into the surveillance system. And so when they're doing these things, it's probably because they want to surveil people arriving in China. If you were to ask me, that's probably the reason they're doing it. They're doing this as a surveillance method. They're getting their biometric data, and they will use it to track and monitor anybody traveling into China. On that point, too, I think the CCP is kind of paranoid right now over spies, and I think that's why they're doing it. They're terrified of information getting out of China right now. Economic data is closely guarded. If you're a business person in China and you so much as question 5%, 5.3% GDP growth, yet again, comrade, if you say otherwise, they'll send you to the gulag. That's real right now. They closely monitor this, lock and key security. If you so much as question it or audit it, even auditing firms have been investigated and people have been arrested. That's real cases right now. They are terrified of real information getting out of China right now. It's one of their biggest issues, because if we find that they've been lying about their entire economy and it's a lot worse, what happens? Well, we'll probably put more trade barriers in place first off. But if you find out the entire Chinese economy is a giant Ponzi scheme, that's market crash. That's the end of the Chinese market. And that also means no more foreign investment. And so they're panicking right now. The CIA, I think, also freaked them out a little bit, little bit of fire under there. What did the CIA do? The CIA posted a Chinese language movie, like a short film. It's really well made, actually, encouraging Chinese officials, Communist Party members in China, to become CIA informants. They released a public video doing that. The CCP is freaked out right now. Even aside from the potential that you could get, a few Chinese defectors who become CIA informants, what is that also going to do? It's going to make all of them paranoid. It's going to make every single one of them start questioning the loyalty of everybody around them. They just manufactured mass paranoia within the Chinese Communist Party, which is kind of funny in a kind of dark humor kind of way. They just made it so nobody is going to trust anybody in the CCP. And I would say that the biometric surveillance they're doing, the cheek swabs, it's probably related to that. They're worried about foreign spies or whatever, or people coming here to, going and getting information. They're terrified right now. Realitysreal.com is saying, stop confusing China with the CCP. That is right. They should not be confused, which is why I very often differentiate the Chinese Communist Party from China and the Chinese people. As many people in Hong Kong have noted, as many people in Taiwan have noted, the CCP does not have the mandate of heaven. There are official ways through which a government would be legitimized in traditional China. The CCP never received that. The CCP, in accordance with traditional Chinese customs, is an illegitimate regime. And many Chinese people point to that, by the way. It does not represent the Chinese people. It is the greatest abuser of the Chinese people. The greatest victims of the Chinese Communist Party are the Chinese people themselves. And I think that if the U.S. or other countries take note of that, the CCP is going to freak out because, they victimize the Chinese people. It's one of the reasons why the CCP tries so desperately to conceal human rights abuses. It's why they don't want any official or any business leader bringing up human rights. It's why if an NBA player so much as writes on his shoe, end slavery in China, the CCP will punish the entire NBA to try to make that not happen again. It's because human rights abuses of the Chinese people are one of the weakest points of the regime. If the Chinese people wake up and realize they've been lied to, that a lot of the history they've been fed is fake, that the Tiananmen Square massacre did in fact happen, that the CCP is rounding up religious believers, including Falun Gong practitioners. And remember, there were about 100 million of them in China, meaning everybody had a friend or family member who practiced. Everybody knew it. And the CCP has been killing them, torturing them. The CCP will fall. And the CCP knows this. Human rights is one of their biggest weak points. And so, yeah, do not confuse the CCP with the badly abused Chinese people, who I believe will soon wake up.
In a world of codes, codes and lights, hidden truths wear digital masks. City of the binary nights, awake from the programmed tasks. Eyes open wide to the glitch in the seams. Planets grab the mirror cage. Truth isn't what it seems. Find yourself beyond the digital rage.